All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We're about to get started here. Figure I'll have a couple of announcements here, and then we'll turn it over to Doug. We are having another presentation here on Thursday. Let's see here. Creating a cybersecurity competition for small businesses in your community. We also have other ones scheduled for Tuesday and Thursday. And May 21st is Women in Security. They're having a panel discussion on the impacts of COVID-19 to our lives, businesses, and cybersecurity. It's got a great panel: Mary Haynes, Jane Rothman, Debbie Blythe, and Erica Boyle. It should be a very interesting presentation, to say the least. So with that, our topic today is digital forensics and incident response. Douglas Brush is the VP Cybersecurity Solutions at Special Counsel, and he'll be giving the presentation. He is an information security executive. He's got 26 plus years of entrepreneurship and professional technology experience. Let's see here. He's a globally recognized expert in cybersecurity, incident response, digital forensics, and information governance. He is the CISO and leading enterprise security, he serves as a CISO and leads enterprise security assessments. Has done lots and lots of investigations involving hacking, data breaches, trade secret thefts, all that sort of stuff. He's also the Vice President of Cybersecurity Solutions at Special Counsel. And he's the host of Cybersecurity Interviews, a popular security podcast. He's also an active poster to Colorado Security Slack channels, where he's known for his entertaining memes. If anyone has any questions during this presentation, just type it into the ISSA Denver Slack channel, and I will interrupt Doug as need be. So with that, I will happily try. You're up.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the kind introduction. Thanks everybody for joining today. So we can kind of jump right in. So what we're going to cover today is the incident response, or the IR portion of digital forensics and incident response. And digital forensics and incident response obviously work hand in hand together. You kind of need one with the other in both the mindset and the technologies. So we'll kind of go through this. Typically at this point, I would ask kind of show of hands who's done incident response. So you're waving at me. I can't see it, but I'm sure your friends and family are wondering why you're just waving your hands aimlessly in the wind, but I know you're out there. Everybody's kind of in different levels of incident response. If you have done IR or even some levels of forensics, there might have been something that you're responding to in a litigation or network intrusion, whether you're doing consulting work or inside work. It really kind of goes along that mindset, and there's different aspects of that, and there's different parts of the process, which we will go over. Additionally, people have different roles with inside IR. So it is this kind of amorphous term. And again, when we say DFIR, it covers a lot. And what we're really going to cover today is what that incident response process looks like, because it is a process. You're not going to become an expert at IR out of this presentation. This should give you enough touch points to know where to dig deeper. So a little bit of that 80-20 rule, the 20% to kind of get you to that next 80, but it's give you that kind of sense. Okay, I kind of got a better idea of this really, and then know where to dive in and be more efficient in getting the next kind of 80%. But, it's really about time in the chair, in understanding what happens both in an enterprise, and whether it's your enterprise, a client's enterprise, on a particular host and network, and being able to kind of build that timeline of events. We're telling a story when we're doing incident response, and to do so, we have to go through that process. So a bit about me, as I said, now it's slides a couple months old, but now it's 26 years in professional IT services. Started in 1995, started my own company doing computer consulting and network consulting. And at the time, I was really focused in the mid and early 90s around mainframes, and there really wasn't what we know today as LANs or local area networks. Internet was just starting to come around. We were coming off of dial-up services like AOL, Prodigy, and CompuServe, and this thing called the internet you might have heard of it as it was kind of taking off. And really, I saw that as a growth area for businesses to be enabled to do their work. But obviously with that, as we're going to see over the past 25 years, and as we discuss some of these things, is that with that growth, there was added risk. And certainly the reasons why we have IR is people attack these networks, attack these hosts, get information, leverage these assets to do other types of attacks. They might use Bitcoining. So there's a concavity of things that can happen when a network or system is compromised, but we're certainly seeing that is because of this interconnectedness from the internet and networks. So I've really kind of been able to see the growth of that, and I've really been able to advise companies on when the proverbial crap hits the fan and doing that incident response work and the forensics and the investigations, but also taking that into kind of real world lessons about what works and what doesn't. If anybody's familiar with the risk management frameworks, whether it's NIST CSF, NIST 800, ISO 27001, and go through all the compliance standards too, there's a lot that's out there. And a lot of them are going to cover, basically there's going to be a section in all of them. And what's your IR plan? How are you going to respond to an incident in your environment? And what does that mean? So it's really good to have that kind of perspective of both sides. So it's not just the academic and knowing, okay, here's what NIST or ISO outlines as appropriate steps and mean times to respond necessarily. It's about really understanding what happens in particular environments. And so I've really kind of seen a wide variety of different incidents and different environments over the past 5-10 years that have really kind of opened my eyes to what works and what doesn't. End of the day, it's coming up as we're going to discuss about having a plan. Kind of as we mentioned, I do have a cybersecurity's interviews. So cybersecurityinterviews.com is my podcast website that has up to 90 now podcast interviews with a lot of people. And I've really focused with a lot of people that have been in IR and tried to tease out some of the things that they've learned in their environments. The one coming up next week is a CISO of Anthem, who they suffered a very public breach. And talking about that, it's crazy too. And we'll kind of dive into some of the numbers, but what still occurs and kind of developing that mindset for response. Outside of doing work, and I encourage everybody is if you're doing a lot of IR, if you're burning 80 hours a week, you need to step away from this and get away and do things that you like. It helps you reset. So that's more, not so much on the how to do IR, but if you're an IR practitioner, it's always important to give yourself some mental health space to reset, because usually when you're under the gun for hours and days and weeks, you start being bad at your job. So finding ways to get away. And the joke is my wife and I moved out here from Denver, which we love, and we're up in Boulder now, from Brooklyn, where we suffered many different types of incidents. Whether we had somebody drive into our house, we had Hurricane Sandy. So we had lots of incidents that impacted our lives that really kind of helped me set the mindset of, okay, what does a response looks like? And the joke was we wanted to move to the Boulder and the mountain areas because the only thing left was a zombie apocalypse, which is crazy enough we're living through now, which sadly enough, my wife and I were able to kick in our kind of response and planning preparation for it when there was a pandemic, because it was literally the last thing we haven't lived through. So we just figured, hey, we're up in the mountains, zombies are going to be at least slowed down. So it's good being in an area where we do have some preparation from it. We're not going down like crazy prep lines, but it's good, again, get in that mentality both in work and in life about bad things are going to happen. How are you going to sustain and survive? I've been doing, again, this for a long time. I actually found this cleaning out a drawer today. Obviously, we're all home much more than we have been in a number of times for folks like myself that travel 60-70% of the time. I found this old Cub Scouts plaque that I got for assisting somebody in an emergency. I was on a ski trip where somebody fell, got hurt, and I had to kind of make sure he was okay. It was my friend, and then go get ski patrol, guide them to where he is. And I kind of got my Cub Scouts award for that. And it's probably one of my favorite awards or plaques than some of the other ones that I've been able to receive over the years. So all kidding aside, it's kind of a cool thing to, again, I've been building and doing this for a while because things happen. And that's really the underlying theme when it comes to incident response. There's two types of people in this world. Those who know they've been compromised and those who don't know. We used to say it used to be those who, haven't been yet, assume compromise. And it's somewhat of a jaded way of looking at the world, but with the measured response and doing the type of response planning, preparation, and going through the steps, if you're constantly in that kind of ready mindset, but not responsive, you can be very effective in your cybersecurity program in building out your response plans and just assume things are going to happen. You're not impervious. There's no silver bullets. We're going to step through a little of the numbers now, but the idea is that the trends have not really slowed down or stopped in the number of organizations that have been impacted, the size of these breaches, the cost of the breaches. So this was something from, let me go actually to the first slide. So this is from 2015. Average consolidated cost of a data breach was about 3.8 million, which was a 23% increase from 2013. Stolen records is about $150, and you were seeing this as a large increase. So I wanted to update this slide. I've been using this slide now for a number of years to talk about the average costs of data breach. And the reality is that it hasn't changed a whole hell of a lot. If you look at it, and I'll let this kind of sink and catch up with my flipping, but that's not a huge downward trend, which is scary. Still very expensive. We're still around 3.8 to 3.9. And again, you take all these numbers with a grain of salt. IBM and Pokemon, I'm at least using them as a guideline for consistency of year over year from what I'm measuring against. And then there's certainly a bunch of other resources that one should look at, but it's just a measuring stick. So take it for what it is. But if you look at it, is a 12% increase over the past 5 years. The costs have continued to go up on a per record. The average breach now has about 25,000 records, which is an increase of about 4%. And I can attest to that. I've seen that in the real world. That is the reality, is that these are not cheap. They're not going away. Organizations continue to have impact from these events. And I'm just going to flip back a couple slides to the dwell time. And the problem is that these events and these incidents occur within an environment with slow mean times to detect and to respond. That's the problem. That you have 60% of the compromised web applications. That's the highest attack vector right now. So whether it be coming from the outside through a firewall or coming through a cloud service, we're seeing cloud services getting popped more than anything else. I can't even count the hundreds of Office 365 compromises I've done, or other types of web apps. Yes, people still come through the firewall. Pretty rare, I've seen in most cases. They'll come through unprotected RDP services. So they'll pop an RDP server on 3389, hit that, pivot, and it's scary because we're starting to see, I suspect we're going to see an increase of that right now occurring with more remote workers. And the problem is that you have all these remote workers, an attacker pops an RDP server, until people really start getting back in the office and maybe detecting some of those anomalies by seeing odd things happen in their environment. They might not even know people are going to be in there. So I suspect these dwell times are not going to change over the next year and a half as we go through this pandemic crisis. If anything, it might extend back. The slide, I just updated the slide today, but it really only went down from 150 days to 100 days now as your median day, number of days till detection. We're present before they were detected. So from that 0 day to the point where they're actually detected. So it's really taking a majority of these breaches where people are not finding out about it until it's far too late and the damage has already been done. Data's gone out the door, and it's kind of a scary thing. So the only way to really kind of fight this is to build in the proper procedures. So again, you can know what's going on and have an appropriate response. I'll go through that a little bit, but at a high level, you don't want to get into a situation where you all of a sudden it's like turning a black light on in a hotel room and you see a whole bunch of things you don't want to see. That can happen once you start doing a lot of SIM events and detection and alerting, but then you can become overwhelmed and then your response time just goes. So you really want to make sure that as you design a program that you're doing this in a programmatic way that meets the business needs of an organization. So we'll jump into that a little bit. And really, what is incident handling? And incident handling is developing a plan for dealing with misuse and abuse of computer assets or systems. And so that can, again, become intrusions, malware infection. And one of the largest or the highest increases of different types of malware that we've seen in the past few years has been ransomware. And ransomware used to be something that would be, for those who don't know, just somebody very opportunistic, very drive-by-ish, where they would spray and pray, hope they hit somebody that clicks on something. It compromises that particular host. And for maybe $600, you would have to pay to get it back. And it was some residential people were getting hit. It was small businesses. And then attackers started realizing, I can really leverage this against large organizations because they have bankrolls, and so they can pay that. So what they would do is go in and ransom entire server environments, and then demand payments that used to be $10,000, $20,000, and now we easily see seven-figure incomes, ransoms quite often now. So it's still something we've seen this huge uptick over the past 2 years of ransom events. But also the scary part is more of these ransom events are now including banking Trojans and other levels of network intrusion where they're exfiltrating data. So it could be PII, financial data, healthcare data that's coming out of the environment. So not only do you have, basically it's akin to somebody breaking your house, stealing all the jewelry, and then on the way out saying, F it, I'm going to burn the house down too, which is horrible. So you have an organization that's already struggling to find out, usually their detection event is the ransomware event. And then as they uncover what occurred, that, oh crap, intruders have been in the network for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 3 months, and have exfiltrated a lot of data, or maybe even left command and control operations behind, that even after you clear out the ransomware, those things are still operating and beaconing out and providing backdoor access for attackers. So they become much more difficult to deal with. And we'll kind of get into how you do classification, but thinking that something is just a ransomware event may or may not be. Something that's just a network event may or may not be. So it's really trying to figure out, the signal to noise ratio. If something's data theft, if it's something that is an insider attack or something else. So you really have to be able to really go through this process in a calm way to understand what is going on. Again, whether this is insider threats or external needs to be determined, because often external actors try to blend in with their internal attackers. So understanding that insider threat becomes important. The other part of incident handling is really defining what it is. And so if you look at events, alerts, and an incident, not all incidents are events, but all events are incidents. So meaning that an event is just something that has changed in the environment. And so that could be normal. That can certainly be normal or abnormal behavior. It could just be something has occurred. An alert is when a series of events or an event triggers you to do something, or at least pay attention, let's say. And so something has occurred and a ticket goes out. And so this example is saying a firewall rule has been changed from, an outbound port being closed to open, and that triggers some type of alert that goes to help desk. And so then people understand that there's some kind of alert. Again, it could be normal. That could be an undocumented change where somebody in the infrastructure team is going outside of maybe the control policies for change control, and maybe just didn't alert that was going to happen. Or was it an attacker changing a firewall rule for data exfiltration? Again, we haven't determined that yet. So an incident is really going to be a malicious event or set of events that could lead to a disruption of business. And again, that's going to be things that can affect the confidentiality, the integrity, or availability of a system or set of systems. So it's usually something that is unauthorized access, or really, it could be an authorized user doing unauthorized things. It could be an unauthorized user doing unauthorized things. So it's understanding what that incident is, and we'll kind of go through what that really means, because there's various types of incidents. There are insider threats, and those exist. People don't want to realize that or think that, geez, there's people inside my organization that could do bad things. We're in a bad economy. A lot of people are losing their jobs. I would say it's important to have a heightened sense of concern about this. I wouldn't overreact, but knowing that things are going to be bad for people over the next couple of years set up people to not think clearly, and bad things can happen. So that could be a bad lever. Somebody is just got part of a reduction in force or RIF, and maybe they want to take a bunch of data with them. And they're malicious about it. Could be disgruntled employees. Maybe somebody's unhappy with having to all of a sudden work at home, or maybe like work at home, doesn't want to go back to the office, and then does something bad once they get back in there. Could be a vendor, and could be somebody that comes in as a contract basis and does something and says, this is opportunistic. I can take a lot of data. I have more access than I should have had set up. Maybe I take something. And it could just be, maybe a new hire that you didn't thoroughly vet, and that could have done something accidentally or intentionally. And again, going through what's known and unknown becomes really important. So Paul, the new guy in IT, did he do something bad that was malicious intent, or was it just an accident where he pushed out a change? And one example I had on that was I got called into an incident right before a couple of the hurricanes in 2011 in New York City. Literally the day before, there's mandatory evacuation. CIO calls me, says, hey, look, we got an incident. We got a problem. He's declaring it already. We're going in, start pulling logs, and I'm going through it over this, working remote, trying to figure it out. and something didn't sit right. He's like, oh, we've traced it back to this IT admin. I think he's done something because he was trying to hack into the CEO's computer. I'm like, okay, it doesn't necessarily seem like it all jives. Basically, what had happened is the new IT guy decided he wanted to do a trial test of Kaspersky internet or internet antivirus and firewall, which basically touches a lot of things on the endpoints with his AD admin credentials, pushed it out to all the endpoints that then started alerting the hell out of everything. That filtered back, everything lit up like a Christmas tree. And we thought this was either a coordinated attack or this admin was doing something malicious. But by the time we kind of unwound the proverbial ball of string, it was just an accident. The guy was just testing out something, push it out into production as opposed to a dev environment. And it just freaked out everybody in a really bad time over a national or it's called a natural disaster situation. Worst time to compound events because people aren't thinking clearly and it becomes a mess. So a lot of these things can happen with, almost accidental. But then there's certainly your outside threat. So it could be bots. It could be things that are just beaconing on the internet that are still doing things. Script kiddies with maybe low-level skills, but are just kind of giving guns to monkeys. They go to a couple dark web forums, pull down information, and start attacking networks, not really knowing what they're doing. We've seen that certainly more with the ransomware as a service model, where attackers are getting into networks. These kids don't know what they're doing, and they're just using pre-built tools from maybe a developer that is kind of the kingpin in the ransomware as a service. And these low-level attackers go out, try to do things, and don't know what they're doing and cause network disruption. Legit want to give people the decryption key so that organization can get back, but don't know how their tools work. And everybody's shut down, and those people can even be blacklisted from the developer. And all of a sudden you have an organization that is trying to negotiate with a low-level attacker that can't get the decryption key. So it could just be, again, these scary kind of scenarios where there's people out there that are using very strongly weaponized malware, scripts, and other types of attack methods and don't really know what the impact is in those environments. There's obviously your state-sponsored attackers and APT groups that are out there, criminal gangs. I probably do most of my work around that. That's most of the time. By the moment that I'm getting involved with that, there has been a significant enough incident or data breach. And again, two different types of things. And incident being what we talked about before, a data breach being unauthorized access or removal of sensitive information. Let's kind of broad term that, but those are the different types of things. And usually when it gets that advanced is when I'm pulled in, because those are more advanced attacks. And that's kind of what we'll talk about a little bit, is your anatomy of, let's say, a typical attack. Reconnaissance, scanning, exploit, maintaining a presence, and exfiltration. So the reconnaissance is really casing the joint, where somebody is looking at things from the outside and determining how to get into an organization. Often we see many attackers use social media, public forums to go on and find information about that organization to target attack that's going to be more effective. If I know who the CEO is, the CFO of an organization, and I know who their assistants are by doing some LinkedIn recon and maybe going to their corporate website, I can help craft an attack that, should I get in there and I can even watch some of that traffic, I know who to direct things to get my my end goal done. And that might go to this, kind of scanning. And that's where they're really kind of fingerprinting the outside, let's say, of an organization, knowing what's out there from cloud services. It's, I can go to things like DNS Dumpster and figure out, okay, what kind of mail service is douglasbrush.com using? I don't know if that's an actual domain. Please don't pop that. I don't own it, but let's just use that as an example, that if I set that up with the proper DNS and MX records, I can very easily see that somebody has an Office 365 tenant, and then I can build an attack from that. Public information, that's how the internet works. I can't really hide that well or obfuscate it in a way. I need it to get email. So it's something that attackers can figure out by knowing what's out there. And some of them might even use network scanning. It's not uncommon still for them to look for those RDP ports by using things like Nmap or even commercial scanners like Nessus or Rapid7 or Metasploit Framework has other scanners as well, that they can sit down there and look at web servers and network devices from the outside and determine ways in. It's, you can do things to look for those IP blocks to try to get a way in. And finally, after you kind of done your recon, your scanning, you've really built up this attack vector, and you're going to go in and you're going to exploit. And that's really getting your toehold or a foothold in the network. And often we see that's going to come in, I would say the most common these days still scarily is phishing emails. They're going to send something. Again, I can go through all that scanning effort to try to pop a firewall, or I can just send a phishing email to 400 people inside the organization. If they don't have good email filtering or protection, I just need one person to click on something with a loaded malware attachment and at least get me a foothold. And from there, I'm going to try to maintain that presence by I got in, I've exploited something. And the most common thing that you see is when people maintain a presence is what we call kind of living off the land, is they're going to start blending in with your daily traffic. They're going to get a local account, get a local admin account, get a domain account, get a domain admin account, and try to sit with inside the organization and operate with inside normal traffic so they can't be detected. So this idea that, yes, you need AV. Yes, you need all these, advanced threat things. They're great. Once they're in and they start popping accounts and they're moving around and there's no two-factor, there's not a lot you're going to do until you start building in other types of correlated threat detection, threat hunting, and other types of things that really allow you to determine what somebody's doing, because they're going to be very quiet. This idea of them doing smash and grab jobs, that's gone. These attackers want to get in, maintain a presence, build a network. Sometimes they can build out a network of many systems where they're using even command and control servers. You might become a command and control server. So they want to kind of stay in below there. Ultimately, the goal is going to be some type of exfiltration. I would say ultimately, and again, that can change depending on some of the attack patterns that we see now. But the idea is that they're going to want to monetize it, let's say. So again, ransomware events, use it as a pivot box for command and control servers, use it for Bitcoin mining. There's some type of thing that they're going to make their efforts worthwhile to them. So these are tough. Once they start getting data out and you're getting to that point, it's pretty scary, because a lot of them are blending in with encrypted traffic, meaning they're going over port 443, SSL connections. Once they're in and they're bouncing out, they're going to go over web traffic and other types of secure traffic, so you can't even see them. A real good example that I had of this one was probably, to this day, one of the better ones I've ever seen as far as a phishing email. It was particularly well timed to a New York City professional services firm. On a Friday afternoon, it went to an administrative assistant pretending to be from the managing partner of this firm, asking for the entire company's W-2s. Likely this was somebody that was picked out because, and again, not, she's happened to be female, but she was probably trying to get ready to get out of the office. New York City, a lot of people go to the beaches during the summer. It's usually 4-hour or 4-day work weeks. So she's probably trying to get out of there. The managing partner's not in the office and probably in Connecticut or Long Island or Jersey himself. And she says, geez, the boss is asking me for this. So she's about to send it. Attacker says, do me a favor though, for security, password, put it in a PDF and password protect it. She's like, that makes sense, because that's secure. It's going to be protected. So it gave the added feeling of confidence that the attacker was somebody to be trusted. And so the person sending it did it. But the beauty of that really was she sent it out basically in a password protected encrypted PDF that even if there was a DLP solution or data loss prevention, watching outbound traffic for things like social security numbers or W-2 forms, that wasn't getting picked up. So it was a really smart way that the attacker enabled the victim to be part of the crime. And so we see more stuff like that. And again, that probably took 5, 10 minutes, 20 minutes for the attacker to go through all this to basically get 100, 120 different W-2s. Huge return on investment, very little friction for them to do it. And there's really, from an IR perspective, there's nothing we can do other than make some remediation recommendations about end user training, better email filtering. But it just took that one time, somebody's guard being down at the right time, and the attacker won. Ideally, when you look at this, you really want to have this methodology of the cyber kill chain that was come up by Lockheed Martin, and really everybody kind of uses it now. But it really came out of that as idea, and kind of going along what we just discussed, is that recon, weaponization, delivery. So this idea that they're going to figure out how to get into your network, figure out the best attack vector, get in, pop something, exploitation, installation, maintain a presence, build that command and control in your action or on objectives. It's really getting stuff to their goal. Monetization, maintaining a presence, stealing data, whatever it is. The call to kill chain is that the quicker you stop this, the greatest risk reduction you get. So the higher you go in reconnaissance, if you can stop them there, really hard though, that's the challenge. You get the most out of protecting, but that's also hard. Like I said, is you're not going to block all your DNS ability for anybody to DNS recon, or things may not work for your employees. So just being able to stop things as early as feasible in this process. So really, you can stop things before exploitation. You can really detect things on weapon, on the delivery. That's great. And if you're doing good network hygiene and you're really looking at things that can also mitigate those risks around what somebody can do in a toehold of weaponization and delivery, and training people on what risks they have by putting information on LinkedIn and social media, that's great. There's things you can do to help mitigate, and the more you can do up there, the better. Secret sauce in all of incident response is preparation and doing as much as you can. So let's just jump right into that. And really the goal of incident response is to build that act, or that action of dealing with something that impacts the confidentiality, integrity, availability. And again, we throw the CIA terminology around a lot, and I know it's been used and overused at times, but it's a good way of thinking about things. And the way I still use it is it helps define certain events too. And we'll talk about characterization, but with things like a ransomware event, it impacts all three. And so it's good to know where things kind of fall within that as you respond to these events. And your goal is really to minimize downtime, business impact, costs, danger, and reputational harm. You want to cut the times down to get this under control and reduce the risk and harm to the organization. And, while this is a beautiful slide, I think, because I put it together, but it's not static. This becomes a well-oiled machine. It's something that you build over muscle memory. So as you go through this process and you go through the steps, and they're fairly meant to be static, the idea is that you don't want to jump around too much and play whack-a-mole. So you don't want to start recovering systems before you have a full containment. And, unfortunate to draw maybe unfair parallels right now, but as we look at this COVID crisis, we're seeing this happen in real life. So I think it's a good analogy of seeing, hey, are we recovering systems that haven't fully gone through eradication and containment yet? Are they going to reinfect other populations of the network? And so I tend to think about the current crisis in IR terms, because I think it's a good enough analogy to help people understand that as you stand things back up, are they clean? Are they segmented? Are they going to reinfect? And so you really don't want to jump around too much on this, and really think through this as a process and not run around with your hair on fire. That's the big thing. So the process is flexible, and you might have to jump back in, and you might get to an eradication phase, and then find, shoot, things weren't really contained, and another thing pops up because as you start to restore, there might have been some backdoor script that popped up, and it might even beacon out to nowhere because you've done the right containment on a firewall, but you might have to jump back in and contain it even further. So again, there's some flexibility as you go into that. And what I try to ask most organizations when I help them build these process and plans is, do you think it's reasonable in your business practices to have this? And it's a loaded question. I think most organizations in 2020, given the stats that we just talked about the dwell time, cost to recover, the cost of the records, you're kind of crazy not to have a good IR plan. And it doesn't have to be crazy. It doesn't have to be something that's 100 pages long, and hell, it shouldn't be. You want to keep something that is short, actionable. The people that are involved know what they have to do. And there's lots of ways that you can break it out that are far beyond this talk. But the idea is you need to have something in place. Even if we have something that's just a one pager on a whiteboard or a napkin, start there. Build it into a flow chart. Just continue to work on something, because this should be a living document that is constantly improved on over time. And that's really kind of comes down to the first step is preparation. And this is really where you get the team ready. And again, if you're doing most things right in your incident response planning, you're going to spend the most amount of your time in preparation. And it's really going to be your kind of steady state and waiting for the next fight. So there's several areas that make up preparation. The first being people. They are your weakest link, but endpoints are great detectors. And what I mean by that is you want to train your users on what to do and what not to do. Obviously, you want to have acceptable use policies and make sure they know where their boundaries are. And it's good to have those good policies to train people on, because you want to set those guidelines. What that helps establish is some norm behavior, hopefully, is that if at least it's systemic in the organization, that information security is part of their DNA and it's something that's on their radar, and they understand the risks that they pose, and they're not hypersensitive, but they're sensitive enough, they can be good detectors to tell you, hey, something weird happened. And one of the things I stress to a lot of IT departments is build a welcoming environment. If you build an environment where people are opening up tickets and you are, being condescending to them and they don't feel open enough to report things, I guarantee they're not. And that's where we've seen incidents where people felt maybe scared of the IT department. They didn't feel comfortable approaching them, and they did not go and tell the IT department something happened. I've seen this happen in ransomware events where clicked on something, user was like, it's Friday afternoon, I just clicked on something, I don't want to bother IT. They always yell at me anyway. Let the computer on over the weekend, and it ransomware the entire environment. Everything was encrypted over the weekend. They came in Monday and they were down for 3 weeks. So, you want to make sure that people are telling you that odd things are happening. You want to train them on that, make sure they're comfortable with talking with the organization about weird things in the IT environment, and you're not just slapping their hands every time they do. You want to slap their hands when they click on bad phishing emails by the third time, but there's again ways to train them on that so they start being less fearful of when they do that they don't report it. And so you also want to train your IT staff on what incidents are and some specialization around some of these steps so they know what to do. Often IT people are dealing with day-to-day operations. They're going to get they're not going to want to get bogged down in knowing everything that I might know from all hundreds of hours of training and experience of going through incident response. I don't expect them to, but they should know the basics, and you should train them on that so they know, again, how to go through this process, who to call, when to phone a friend, things like that, and do it at a frequency enough basis because it'll help reinforce it. And this is a good thing where you do things like tabletop exercises with folks with inside the board, so the board members, C-suite, leaders with inside the organization that sit in a room on a frequent enough basis, hopefully once a year, go through the IR plan and tabletop exercises against and see how they would respond. And often you find there's weaknesses within that. And that's great. You want to find those weaknesses. I've had ones where, they said, this would go perfectly flawless and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, that's great. If that's 2:00 on a Thursday afternoon, what if it's 2 a.m. on a Saturday? How are you going to respond to this? Oh yeah, I guess that phone tree we had set up wouldn't work. Or if I had to reach out to somebody and they were on vacation, that wouldn't work. So it's going through that tabletop to kind of find those holes because you don't want to discover those when the house is burning down. And you really want to track your progress on that and from what's working and what's not. So as you train people, and again, document things on their security awareness training with things like SANS has securing the human. A social engineering toolkit has some ways to test and train people. So, again, seeing how people respond to these different types of live fire events, so doing phishing emails and training is a good way to really kind of get people a little more sensitive to these types of things. And again, going back to policies, documentation sets the tone. It helps notify users what a policy and plan is going to be in for when there's IR, who to call. Often you find organizations, they say, well, I just opened up a help desk ticket. Maybe that wasn't the proper escalation point. Maybe that organization had something on their intranet that said, call this number on a suspected security event. People aren't trained about that. They're not going to know where to look for that. Or if it's not in a policy document or a procedure somewhere, they're not going to know where to look for it. So make sure people are notified of where to go in on that and understand, here's your call to help. Throw up the bat signal this way. And it really has to come, again, I know it's cliche we say in cybersecurity, but a top down. It can't just be an IT pushing this. If it's not taken seriously from the powers that be, and it's not coming from the business itself, it's not going to be taken seriously. So you really have to have management team get in and really push these policies and preparation procedures so they understand what they're signing off on, because essentially that should be them. That if you create a policy that says, say an acceptable use policy, that it's saying things that are not just IT, but it's coming about organizational risk and it's signed off by corporate legal, it has more weight to it. It has more meat on the bone. So you want to get that type of stuff in there. And part of this preparation too is defining when to notify and who to notify. And that can be really tricky. Often I am a very early call when there's an incident, but I will say, have you called your insurance company yet? Have you called outside legal? If this was a potential criminal act, you have stolen money, have you called your local FBI office? I might be so far down the list of people you call because there's many other things that step in. And so when to notify law enforcement can be real tricky. They will often come in and when they want to run the show, but you get the unlimited power of law enforcement, meaning they don't have to wait to, or I mean, it's easier for them to get information about, let's say, who owns an IP address than me as a, going through civil procedure to try to get that. I might never get that. Google's not going to respond to me. Google's more likely to respond to a criminal investigation. So having law enforcement involved can be really important. Additionally, with law enforcement, I'll also note that it can also be very helpful when you have law enforcement, because it can help push back state regulators on when you notify. And this goes to what we're saying, third party. So whether you're going to notify business partners, whether you're going to notify customers, you might have some breathing room there. If you have law enforcement involved and it's an active investigation, you can probably slow your roll on that. And again, I'm not a lawyer, not pretend to be one, but definitely talk to outside counsel and competent breach counsel when there is, and hopefully far prior to this, what those trigger points are going to be, and when you're going to bring those people. Because sometimes you want to kind of keep this contained. You don't want to notify everybody. If attackers are in the network, they might be listening. And if you start broadcasting everybody an email, oh my God, we've had an incident, the attackers might be watching that communication or listening in for who else you're going to notify. So less is more sometimes in that, and knowing when and who to notify becomes incredibly important. And that should be well laid out prior to an incident. Also, is your team building. IR is a team sport. I mean, it's not just technical. You have your incident handlers, and that can be somebody that is, maybe somewhat technical, but is also better as a project manager, better at communication skills, might not be able to reverse engineer every piece of malware, but you want a good incident handler that can really quarterback this operation and work with people that are doing the forensics and pulling memory artifacts, pulling disk artifacts, pulling logs, making sure your admins are on board with this. Your network engineers, generally in a mature enough organization, you're going to have infrastructure teams that are split up between desktop admins, server admins, network engineers. You want to make sure that all those people, they don't always talk together or talk well or like each other, but you have somebody that can coordinate those efforts between them, because the last thing I want to get is an event where I can't get logged into something, or I trace an event back to a firewall from a Windows server, and I can't get those damn logs because somebody's like, oh, I don't talk to that guy. You want to make sure that there's some point of contact that has the ability to gather information from those people, and you build those teams in advance and have those call trees available. You want to have your department managers involved, where if there's significant business impact to a specific unit and something's going to be down, they'll probably want to know. They're going to have to notify their employees that are going to come into work tomorrow that can't get on. That may have to notify customers that, hey, we're having an incident, and be given a script of what to say and what not to say, so they can let other people know. And that can certainly go to HR. I would certainly say making sure HR is involved in a lot of these, because again, if it's an insider threat or it's determined that there's a potential insider threat, different things in your IR plan might kick off, and you need to have HR involved in that you don't overstep bounds on that, where you can get yourself in an area of legal trouble with HR. So it's always good to have HR and to that legal counsel. And so you're going to have your outside counsel, which is, I highly recommend most organizations talk and build relationships with data breach people, data breach coaches, I should say, folks that deal with 3,000 incidents a year, as opposed to your inside counsel, who might be great at understanding your organization, the specific needs of your contracts, will fight for the only certain amount of an indemnity clause. But when it comes to an incident, they may have no idea about the 50 different state regulations. You want to have people that do, because that can really help mitigate some of the hardened risk downstream if you have competent outside legal advice about specific to data breaches. Again, partners with inside the organization, and I would say, that's the C-suite and above, director levels and above, that really have some coordination, and can really push things through when there's problems and they need to make things happen, and also help coordinate. Again, I said HR, I don't know why I have it there twice. And again, we talked a little bit about law enforcement, and the reason I put it on the team building slide as well on this, because FBI is uncomfortably nice now. They've always not had the best relationship with the cybersecurity community, or even with organizations that always hand off. Now it's like they will, if you meet them at an event, they'll want to go have coffee. It's like they're selling you a timeshare. It's a complete 180 of how they used to be, and they're awesome. They will tell you, here's some things we're seeing. We can't get in specifics. They are much more in information sharing now, and if you share with them, it's reciprocal, and they don't get a crazy amount of details. Often they might notify you certain IOCs. If you tell them, here's what I'm seeing, they might feed you back some stuff. It's great. So really highly recommend that people get in contact with their local FBI field offices as part of their IR plan, and have those numbers in the call tree, because you may have to call them and building that relationship in advance. And I know we touched upon prior to my talking, but they were talking about ISSA, Women in Securities has Debbie Blythe will be coming on. She probably did the best I've ever documented in myself or researched when it comes to preparation and team building. She had friends like 3 pages deep where she was just calling and she got things done in ways that would never have happened had she not gone through this process. So I can't stress how important team building is. And we have real life examples here in the Denver community, and Debbie will talk about it, had her on the podcast talking about it, and it's amazing. I mean, that was perfect. And so you want to be able to do that and to make sure you're doing that. Final one just is also there is just the insurance aspect. A lot of organizations now have cyber insurance. That cyber insurance provides panel vendors and data breach attorneys that you don't have to go through the phone book looking for them. Build those relationships with your insurance brokers and insurance carriers in advance to find out who's on those panels, make some phone calls, make sure they're in your Rolodex in advance. Part of your preparation as an organization is just really knowing where to look, where to work from. When the proverbial crap hits the fan, are you going to be working from your office? What if there's a global pandemic right now and you can't go to your conference room? How are you going to coordinate that? Does everybody have Zoom accounts? Have you already purchased that or using Fuse, GoToMeeting? Has that all been thought of well in advance so you're not scrambling while the house is burning to try to, punch in somebody's corporate Amex card at 3 a.m. to buy, 40 Zoom licenses? You want to make sure you have that all planned out and your contingencies planned for backups in advance. And that goes to your supplies. Having those command posts and, basically a war room. You want to think about what to buy, whether it's going to be everything from, food. It could be whiteboards. How are you going to communicate? Is it going to be out-of-bound communication? So doing things, are you going to use text? Are you going to use Signal? Maybe you want encrypted text in case there could be compromised phone. Who knows? You want to figure out how you're going to and where you're going to work from and think about all these scenarios in an organization, because when you fire up this team and everybody has to communicate and coordinate, you want that to be as frictionless as possible, because often it does not come at the best time. People are already tired. It's late in the day. It's on a Friday. 5 p.m. this pops. Where are you going to work from? So start thinking about that well in advance and making sure you have those access to systems. Again, you don't want any IT person being a single point of failure. So where, Joe, the IT admin for all your server farm, is on vacation or is unavailable, that you're waiting for him to come back online. So you want to make sure all those access to systems is thought out and who has the ability to get that. I've even seen organizations be almost fearful of saying, okay, well, we're not going to put it all electronic. We might want to put it on a internal protected SharePoint site. But again, if the sites are down because we have a replication issue or there is a ransomware event, print them out. Make sure there's updated, once a year you print out and laminate them a call sheet where people can have those communications and access to systems laid out and it's locked away and there's some type of way. Again, just think through the worst case scenarios, because these things don't happen at a good time and you're often going to be scrambling. In preparations, you go to your go bags. And so that can mean when you have to put boots on the ground, having the ability to go gather information. Luckily, I would say in the most part, many organizations now, and I'm saying this because I'm also retracting this in my thoughts as I'm speaking, because I say most organizations could do things remote, except when you can't. And that's what I'm dealing with in a couple events right now, incidents right now, is where we can't get the data and people are working remote. They're able to remote in, but we're trying to download terabytes of data over the wire. It's not going really well. And so then it's coordinating somebody to go in and plug in a hard drive. Well, where are they going to get the hard drive? Are they going to go to a Best Buy? Do they have to order it online and do a curbside pickup? And then they're going to have to encrypt it. Does that laptop they have the right USB? I mean, you get to see this starts spiraling out to, was this stuff ready? And unfortunately, I'm usually brought in to say, did you have this stuff ready? And they're like, no, we never thought this would happen, because we figured if there was going to be an incident, somebody would have told us. I was like, well, we're telling you now, and you should have had this shit ready. So, really, I mean, I can't stress enough, having how you're going to go gather data and pull it back ready is so important. And, whether, again, it could be a dedicated laptop, hard drives, checklist, call list, writing supplies where you have to label things. We've been in incidents where we've had, I did one where 25 different sites were impacted. We collected 4 servers from 4 of them, so I don't know, 16. And you're having to label things on the fly. You got to be able to grab that bag, go image hard drives, and label those. Becomes really important. You don't want to be scrambling for things, because these things, again, I'll say it again, do not happen in the most opportune times. Little things too, I would also recommend in your go bags. These are my Doug's goofy little things that seem goofy until you need them. A Tide pen. Often you will be working and you will spill something on your shirt, and you will work overnight, and then you're going to have to present some status of your findings to somebody who's well rested, who's in a suit, and is wondering why you have pizza stains or coffee stains on your shirt. So a Tide pen can help freshen yourself up. Deodorant, a comb, toothbrush, power bars, Cliff bars, things like that, whatever, just something that can continue to work. So, if you don't get a break, you can still jump right into the next stage of notifying people within inside the organization what's going on face to face. It's a weird little quirky thing, but I can't stress that enough. How you'll wish you'll be happy that I told you that if you ever have to get into that phase. Because ultimately you get into detection analysis, and this is really the identification, is determine if we have an incident. So an event, again, is, like I said, something has happened or is regarded as happening, an occurrence, especially of some importance in the environment. Not every event is an incident. So an incident is, again, that series of events, something that you can make that determination, did something bad happen? So you really want to define it and make sure that you're not jumping the gun all the time. Because you really want to detect and determine whether this event is an incident and who's authorized to call it. Do you want your L1 SOC or your help desk person saying, hey, we have an incident? You gotta be careful with that wording. That is a trigger word, and that can mean a lot of things go into play. So you want to be very careful that you're not calling an event an incident, and that somebody is authorized to make that call and can say, we're now following the incident response plan. Or obviously you're still following it at a high level, but that you're really making determines that once you flip that switch, that you're going full bore on that this is an incident. What are you going to do? Because you don't want to make a bad call that, we thought it was something and we overreacted. But you also don't want to say, hey, geez, we didn't think it was anything, we didn't react. It's a very delicate game to play. I would say for the most part is having somebody that is authorized to call it, but also knows when to stop it and bring that train back. And so that becomes a really good characteristic, I should say, of your incident handlers that can say, okay, we're going to go forward. We're going to get a couple of steps into this. But if we determine this is anomalous, again, like in my scenario of it was just an IT guy, whoa, let's dial this back. It was still an incident. We saw it enough of an impact to the organization, but we're going to start, standing down the troops. So often, again, it's better to respond than to not, but knowing when to bring that back. And so you say, okay, we have an incident. Somebody needs to quarterback this. And that's where you have that incident handler. Again, does not always have to be the most technical person. And it's somebody that can really coordinate the efforts of a lot of people, can speak to the technical teams, can talk to the lawyers, can talk to the board, can talk to law enforcement, somebody that can really quarterback that whole situation. And you really want to be careful about information control. It's need to know only. Think about out-of-band encrypted channels. Again, whether it be cell phones that are using encrypted text messages, something like that, Pigeon, I don't care what it is, something that's not part of your normal day-to-day operational stack. Because if you start sending out Zoom meetings and calendar invites to have everybody join calls to discuss the ongoing incident, if an attacker is in your email system, what's stopping them from dialing in and listening? And that has happened. I mean, attackers will figure out, okay, they're going to do this and be ready. Do not give them that opportunity. So you want to talk in out-of-bound communications, because you should consider if your network's compromised, your communications are compromised, think of out-of-bound communications. And you really want to, I would stress here, is that as you communicate and think about what's going on as you're doing this detection, is not always the detected incident is always the original incident. And this happens more times than I can count. Again, ransomware is a perfect example where an attacker ransomwares a server. We get in, maybe they've only ransomed or encrypted a data partition, but we still have the OS. We start pulling the OS logs, say, yep, attacker got in, here's their path, payload distribution, hit the server. What about all these other similar logins from other admins that are happening around 3 a.m.? Are those normal? Turns out they're not normal. One time we had one where the detected event was the ransom event. By the time we were done stretching back the timeline for, only went back as far back as we could go as 9 months, but there was 13 other compromised externally compromised accounts in that environment. People were in and out of there. We don't know how many, like at least 2 or 3 different attack groups. And the only way we detected it was that ransomware event because the dwell time is so long. So don't always assume that what you're looking at is the only thing. There could be many other things going in that environment, and you often find other things. But where do you look? This becomes critical. There's a lot of stuff to look at. And you have thousands of nodes, you have routers, you have firewalls, you have cloud servers, you have all the things in the world. It becomes a very measured response. And this is where you can't go image everything and try to gather all this information. It's not going to help you. Dumping all that information into Excel ain't going to happen. So you really want to be measured about how you go in and kind of think about this castle walls approach. You want to catch on the outside, but reality most are caught on the inside. So assume they got breached over and they're somehow inside and they're pivoting with user accounts. So starting to know where to look becomes really really important. So again, looking from kind of top down on this list here, your network again is going to be all your network perimeter things, ingress, egress points, proxies, DMZs, IDS, IPS. So really what's happening on the shell and on the walls. And you want to be able to get that stuff. Why I would say it's really important to trigger that team to start preserving stuff is a high transactional amount of that stuff. So say, for example, you don't know if they came in through necessarily through a firewall, or you suspect maybe an RDP intrusion on one of those points. If you don't tell somebody to preserve those logs within a short amount of time, they can get rolled over. So by the time you figure out, oh, this was the popped host, now I want to go back and get the firewall logs. They're already written. You've lost part of your chain of evidence, really what you want to look for. That sucks. So make sure you're preserving things based on that kind of order of volatility, because network logs, things like that will transition over further. Hosts, you're going to have things like order volatility there too, where you start looking at a Windows server or a system, and you might have to look for what's happening on that system. So it could be RAM, disk level activity, the things that are happening within that. So I would say the hosts and the systems themselves. So host-based perimeter, so host-based firewall logs to think what's happening on the NIC to the system itself. Is that kind of combination of the two with other activities. So what are users doing on? You gather that information, you start getting some investigation. Do you need stuff on the network? Or are there application logs? Sometimes there could be web app logs or app server logs that you need to gather as well that are not part of just your system logs. So you have to know where to look for that. Most part, a lot of stuff is going to be in, I would say, in a Windows environment or a Linux environment. It's going to end up in your logs kind of area. But you have to know, like, every different system is different, and you might have to pull logs from different areas. And I will also say it for cloud-based systems now. We certainly see that becomes within Office 365 or other SaaS solutions. Trying to gather those logs is not that easy all the time. You don't always have full control. So now we kind of have some detection. We have an event. What do? Well, we got to contain it. I don't want this to spread. I don't want this to continue. So I have to stop the bleeding. It's not going to be a silver bullet thing, but I need to kind of put the boots on the ground and I characterize the incident. So is it a denial of service? Is it data theft? Is it external hacking, malware, email? What is this that we're dealing with? And how critical is it? Is this business critical, or is this something that can, it's going to be a decom system anyway? And I've seen that where somebody pops a system, can determine there's no data exfiltration, and I say it's pretty well contained to this system. They didn't go anywhere. They didn't take anything. Click, turn it off, and probably jumping ahead of some of the steps, but you can offline that, cut the internet connection to it and bring that offline, but it might be contained to that, and you're done. That's great. You can determine they didn't go anywhere else. Doesn't always happen, unfortunately. Often they've pivoted through multiple systems again when they're living off the land, bouncing laterally. But it's great where you can determine how critical it is and how sensitive of the event and information that's in there. You kind of weigh the risks here. Again, this is where that part of it, we're having a good incident handler in there to kind of maybe back it up, say, okay, let's all stand down a little bit. We can characterize this as maybe not as critical or much of a business impact. Let's put the appropriate responses in there. Because again, if you start firing up everybody every single time and you go full bore, you're going to burn out your team. And if everything's this hyper response and reaction, I'm saying we call it incident response and not incident reaction for a reason. Reaction is going to burn people out. And if you overdo it all the time, people are just going to burn out. And so you really want to make sure that that event is, and an incident is characterized in the appropriate way and the appropriate response is given to it. And really figuring out who's going to tell management. That's always a fun thing, is who's going to be that go-between to letting the business unit leaders and inform management on a regular basis, and maybe even law enforcement, what's occurring. And you need somebody to kind of operate that point. Usually it's that incident handler, but sometimes I've had that be on the teams that I've worked with, be the data breach coach who's technical. We would feed her summaries at 5 o'clock every day, and she would go update the team, or update a couple people in management, and then update law enforcement. And then maybe every other third day, I would do a presentation to the board. So it can really depend. I mean, it's not, again, not one person, but it's just got to be somebody that's go between. You have to figure out who's going to notify those appropriate parties. As you start doing this, that first 24 hours feels like 24 days. You're going to start forgetting things. All your synapses are firing. You've taken way too much time to like focus and look down, and you're just energized and all right, let's have 3 more cups of coffee. And you're just going to like go through things and you're hyper boom, boom, boom. And it's great. And you've figured out all these things. If you do not write this stuff down, you're going to forget it within those 24 hours, in those 3 days, in that week. The longer the time goes on and you're not memorializing what's going on and tracking what's going on, going back and deciding, oh crap, there was something that 3 days ago we came across, I might have to go back and look at. That might have been an IOC that was good to look at. Where did I put that? Oh yeah, it was in my brain when I was under 2 days of not sleep and eating McDonald's and I feel awful. So yeah, I don't remember it. So if you're not writing this stuff down, and 3 Ds being documentation, 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 write things down as you're going along. If you're working too fast to document, you're working too fast, period. Document and memorialize what the hell's going on, and do Excel sheets, forms. What's great too is, your general help desk ticketing system, leverage that, at least get things memorialized in a place that there's, really going on. And there's other tools that are out there, and there's all these SOAR tools now, which are great. So out of these SIMs have built-in ability to do that. Awesome. As long as you're documented, I don't care. Just do it. Because you want to record what's going on. I would also say one of the important things in containment too is keep a low profile. You want to be very cautious about what you're disrupting on systems when you're spinning up new maybe domain accounts on these systems that are suddenly logging into a server. Attackers, if they're monitoring this right, they might detect that you're there. If you tip your hand, you want to be very careful. I mean, part of the containment strategy is you want to preserve enough information and evidence that you can really determine the full scope of what's been impacted here. If you tip the attacker off during an early containment phase and they start backtracking and closing the doors behind them, wiping logs, and maybe they ransomware it on the way out, you're going to lose a lot of information. You won't know the full scope of your investigation. So I definitely want to keep a low profile as you're going through these very early phases, so you're not tipping off, again, those attackers. You'll do a lot of touch and go analysis, I would say too. The difference is going to be from, I would say, deep dive forensics is where I take a system and I'm going to go through memory artifacts, the disk artifacts, really kind of start digging in deep, versus getting a lot of that touch and go. I'm going to maybe pull a little bit of information here, again, make sure it's always done forensically sound in a repeatable manner that doesn't modify or change the source information. Sometimes, with volatile memory, you're only as good as the time you're capturing it, but you want to make sure that you get things in a preserved manner and you're doing it really quickly. That's measured in hours. I want to be able to look at 1,000 systems. Maybe there's a tool that I'm deploying that's looking at all of them and gathering a lot of common forensic information to, build the frequency of least known and most known, and try to help, measure against that baseline, that if I've done my preparation right, I know what I'm measuring against. Versus then going again, maybe I'll find a couple of systems after I do that wide 1,000 system look and gather those artifacts, say, okay, there's 2 or 3 systems. And in the example I was saying before with those, I had 25 cities get popped. We took 3 or 4 city servers in, and then we pulled a couple web app servers. But we started really wide. We started just gathering a lot of the logs and artifacts and different things on each host, login information. Then we traced it back fairly quickly within a couple of days to some of the source and patient zeros or near them, gathered those systems, did deeper dive information, forensics. So that is, you want to start wide and go narrow. You don't want to, again, image 3,000 systems and try to run them through NKs and FTK. It just ain't going to happen. So you really want to kind of make sure you're doing a lot of that, touch and go, figuring out what's going on, building your indicators of compromise or IOCs, feeding that back into your plan and system, and just keep going through and finding new things until you have this fog of war lifting. So saying, okay, I'm starting to see what happened here. And then maybe I'll pull a couple of those systems offline, because as you contain it, you want to get in your short term. gathering all that evidence. We want to stop the attack from, really doing more damage. So again, this forensic data gathering that I was just talking about, make sure you practice that. You don't want to be learning how to use volatility for the first time during an incident at 3 a.m. Same thing with write blockers. If you're having to take a system offline or use network acquisitions, Office 365 data gathering, you want to have had some muscle memory, or at least have people that have done it before gathering that evidence. Because, learning within, live fire drills on the battlefield just suck. And you don't want to do that. And really understand that order of volatility, that your RAM, your page file, and host systems are going to change, might have some great information. Logs on remote systems, again, those could be overwritten, but they also might stay very static. So it's good kind of knowing that. Be great. Maybe you have a tape backup that an attacker was in 3 days prior. That was the time the last tape backup was done. Ransomware event happens. They decide they're not going to pay the ransomware. They have to restore the system. Maybe the last good information about what was occurring. And again, because of that long 12 time, I can go back to that tape backup from a couple of days ago and say, oh, wow, yeah, that has information that allows me to determine what's going on. And I can start saying, okay, that's great. I can now I have my LCs. I can start building those walls and really stop this from spreading more. And really what you want to be able to do as you're going through this in this initial kind of containment short term is informing the users, hey, we've had an event, there's an ongoing investigation, don't speak about it. If somebody in the press asks you, here's our media contact. And I've worked with, part of the IR plan is making sure that the media contact is maybe the marketing person that has a canned message from legal, that stuff is already, again, the really left-hand side of really preparation, but that when users are informed, it's kind of a playbook that they're going to follow. And as you are also kind of containing this, you might have to make some changes. That's always a tricky thing. And actually, this is one of the hard parts, and where there's a good team coordination, because often you have to take systems offline or change how they're having access, or rerouting traffic, making DNS changes or entries different. That can disrupt them. And that is going to impact the business. Could be a system that is not fully impacted, but could have, maybe an attacker pivoting off of it, but shoot, I got to take that down. What am I going to do? So I have to be able to inform the business user and get documented authorization that I'm doing that. Because we do often get in those situations where, all right, I got to take this system offline. We're going to keep it running. We're not going to wipe in data, but we need to take it offline. I got to gather some stuff. I think there's a command and control outbound, and I'm going to stop the network traffic, but I want to maintain memory and other disk activity. Sure, go ahead, do it. And then that person gets, yelled at by a customer. Hey, why is that server down? Or something's not working. They're like, oh, I don't know. I told them that they can do that. I didn't tell them they can do that. And they suddenly have a change of heart and memory of what's occurred. Get that in writing, that I'm taking this system down, this host name, this IP, you are authorizing this, reply yes. Whether it's on a handwritten letter or email or something, that you get, documentation that you're taking that system down for the short term or making changes. And part of that can be part of your change management process. And again, this should, theoretically all be well documented in your IR plan, because you've done such amazing preparation before this moment. Long term is you really want to keep things going till eradication. And so these are just still temporary solutions. Do not think that this is forever. Unfortunately, this is where I have seen people take it forever, where they have an event, they bounce their primary systems, and they're running things off of virtual VM backup servers for 4 or 5 months. That's should not be viewed as a long-term solution. That's just a temporary solution, where you want to say, okay, we're just going to really keep things going. We don't want to take operations down. We're stopping the spread of this. We're starting to break it off. Maybe there's a couple systems here we can bounce and reimage, and maybe there's a couple we have to keep going, but we're still looking at things. But so really maybe start thinking some of those long-term rules. And so a lot of times we've seen, obviously, pushing out full password changes, putting in patches, often in there, patching, I would say the last couple of years with things like SMBv1 exploits that were happening, was how we're going to change the passwords, order that with the patching, remove accounts, and do all this on specific hosts that have to go through a number of these changes. And often they're going to be permanent. Again, document those, put them in a help desk ticket system, put them in the IR report, just somewhere. Again, you should be documenting really hardcore throughout this entire process. Now we're going to move to eradication. So we're going to start removing the artifacts and maybe taking a little deeper dive to what's happened. So now the operational tempo starts slowing. The adrenaline's starting to wear off. People are starting to get tired, but you really have to be focused here. I can't stress that enough. It's like, okay, how are we going to get rid of what's left? We need to remove these things. Sometimes they are scripted command and controls that can start beaconing out. Even though maybe I've updated OpenDNS or firewall ports and they're not hitting out, I don't want that stuff still running, but I want to get rid of these things. I don't want an attacker figuring out another backdoor or coming in through another way and repurposing tools, or maybe they have a sleeper set of tools they haven't used yet. I need to figure out what to do. You can try piecemealing some of these things and getting rid of them. It's difficult. I would say it's more difficult now with a lot of the banking Trojans that are out there, like Emotad and things that are working within that sphere. They're nasty. They're really well built. Often it's you nuke it from orbit. If you can, that's great. In this way, you're really what you're doing is you're going back, and if you're doing good preparation, I'm not gonna stop saying that. Your good preparation is you're gonna have gold images that are regularly updated and baselined in your environment. That when you have to say take the system down 5 p.m. on a Friday, great, we'll have it back up, tested by Saturday afternoon. We'll start loading data, and sometime by mid-Monday, we'll know that this is gonna be running. If you don't have these good gold images and you're grabbing, installs and redoing this from, kind of a chaotic way, it's going to take you forever. And then you're going to have to patch all the OS and other things on the fly. And that could take, if you're doing your standard Windows, build and then doing the updates, it could add hours, it can add a day. So if you have a regular gold image to roll back from and bounce it back to, good on you, do that in a virtualized environment. It's crazy not to these days. There's plenty of ways to snapshot and go back. So if you can do that, and it's a good tested, clean image, go to those, stand up on those, patch them, make those permanent changes again. But you really want to go to those last known backups. It's really hard if you have something that is persistent in there, and particularly rootkits, to justify just taking out little pieces. You want to really do a full clean wiping when you can. And what I've seen and more organizations do on this eradication strategy now is also move a lot of things to cloud services, good and bad. And I want to stress that it's great that you can say, cool, I can kind of like go through containment eradication on one phase, but I can get operational on another. And I can get more to that jump to a recovery stage a little bit quicker if I spin up things in Office 365, G Suite, Amazon. Yes, you can, but what resources do you have available to harden that new set of infrastructure while you're still doing the eradication, containment, and recovery on your other stuff? You can't just ignore that stuff. So yes, you can get some operational meantime to recover from getting some of those services up, but be very careful, because if you just stand up an Office 365 environment, you don't have the right people involved, and you set things to not be secure, and maybe you're not putting on multi-factor. What's to say that attackers are not watching your MX records and then just pivot over to that and then pop those? So you really want to make sure as you're going through this eradication, it's not, again, it's a controlled response, and you're not just jumping into new things that could potentially open yourself up. And now you're kind of back on your feet and you're feeling a little more comfortable, but you really want to think about it from an attacker's perspective. They probably had some amount of time getting into your systems and networks. Often they'll try to get back in. We've seen attackers send emails, write notes, often not too nice, that they're going to dox you, they're going to re-ransomware you, they've gone to assistants inside of an organization to threaten them. I mean, they've knocked on those doors again, and so you really want to watch your six or watch your back and see if they're going to come in. You can't just figure out, okay, they're eradicated, they're not coming back. You have to really kind of make sure that they are not trying to get back in because they've made some investment to get in. It's rare that they only have one way in, one way out. So you really have to kind of watch your back. I kind of mentioned this before, and as you stand these systems back up, is you want to work with the system owners or business unit leaders, meaning that they should be involved with the rebuild. They should know the updates, the changes. You want to notify them. Do they have to do the hands-on work? No, but they should be involved with the process. Say, hey, we're bringing the system back up. Here's what we're going to do, timelines, things like that. And a lot of those temporary changes that you made, it may want to be permanent. You may have to find that, yes, we're going to have to redo all our MX records because we did good Office 365. Some of the other records might have to be permanent. Again, you're documenting those as you go along in your IR plan, but also in your change management and other areas that you know that, hey, look, these are the changes that were done. It's probably not going to be your last event, incident, or response. So changes you made now might need to be referred back on your next one. And if you don't have that stuff documented, people are not going to remember. So making sure all those permanent changes are well documented. And you're going to really kind of, as you get these systems back up, is also scan them for new vulnerabilities. So often what I'll do is, as we bring these systems back online and we isolate them, we have fresh passwords, maybe put multi-factor. We'll scan them both internally and externally. Maybe if it's a system in a DMZ, or there might be a forwarding port into them with things like Nessus, and just say, hey, is there anything that we missed? You want to trust but verify, and look for those additional holes that might be left open. So you're going to go through and just check those affected systems and scan them again. Maybe re-up your baseline, because there could be other systems are out there. You might discover something now that go, oops, we got to jump back into a little bit more of a early containment phase, because we just discovered that there's a system that's out there that has SMB1 vulnerabilities that we totally forgot about. Crap, was that system affected? And we don't know. So you might find other systems as part of this eradication process that you might have to revert back to a little bit more of a containment phase and just double check. Is there anything else going on those? Because you might find other things in there. And again, things like AV and next generation AV and endpoint protection can be really important out there, because you take all these IOCs that you built from your touch and go investigations, your deep dive forensics, everything that you built to conduct your investigation. You may want to feed that back into your endpoint monitoring tool, so okay, hey, are they trying to going back to watching your 6? Now you know what to look out for. There might be some indicators out there that are valuable to you. So you want to be able to look for those things and check and build other IOCs. Now you got the systems out, you're starting to recover them. Yay, people can go back to work, but you really want to just not set it there. You want to validate these systems. Again, working with the business systems and owners to say, hey, look, schedule time to go with them. This is what we've done. We brought it back up. Is this operating normal? And make them sign off on that. Just as you would sign off, take them down, make them sign off that you're taking it up, and that they know that and you ask them, is this what it's supposed to be doing? Is there anything abnormal? Is there any changes? I've had stupid things where the CEO, we had to image their system and maybe, their desktop, because it could have been potentially impacted, and restored to them. And this, that's the last person you want complaining that things aren't working. And it's usually, oh, my icons are not there. And you're like, oh crap, and they're like, nothing's working. I'm like, okay, you go. And it's like, oh, let me drag the Outlook icon to your desktop. But you want to kind of sit there and work with these people, schedule a time with them, make sure that it's tested and working in a way that they expected, not just you. Perception is reality. And if there's a VIP person inside the organization that feels that the system's not working, they're going to suck your resources away from you as you're going around doing recovery in other areas. Make sure you schedule that time, get a sign off, and that they're happy. A little internal customer service goes a long way. And you really want to continue to monitor. Look for those things that you built in those IOCs and logs, your IDS, your IPS, your host intrusion detection systems, whatever it is. You fed in those IOCs, you're looking for those new things, you're continuing to monitor. And maybe you're deploying new scripts that you're now looking for new things in your environment. There's different ways to detect changes with things like some of the system internal tools. Maybe you're putting those out there. You've never used those before, but these are great tools that you can detect endpoint changes to things in the file system, port changes, things like that. So you're really kind of going through that. Most people think they're done here. Again, this is a process. You've now been through this for weeks. You've gone through this high peak of adrenaline, you crash, you're like getting system back. You're not done yet. Now you have to go through the lessons learned. This is actually not a terrible process. People try to put this off, but don't. Do it as soon as possible. Draft what has occurred. Allow the drafts to circulate with the right people that were involved. So again, legal counsel, business unit leaders, whoever's part of that incident response team, that they can draft things. And know what's gone, what's occurred, and make sure you get that input, that you're not missing things, little things like host names, IP addresses, dates. You want to make sure that stuff's all right and that the right people are spot checking that, particularly if you're working across teams at different time zones, and people are rolling on and off. So you want to make sure you're getting all that stuff really well put into that. And not everybody's going to agree at times. And if there's a dissenting opinion of what occurred, get that documented. Ultimately, what you want to do is you want to get this down to a point where you're building this for an executive summary. And the idea being that in 1 to 2 pages, hopefully 1.5 at the most, somebody can read this and go, cool, I got this. Not a lot of further questions. If they do, there's 30 pages they can flip through, but you want to hit them in the beginning. Know your audience. These are people that like bullet points, white spaces, charts, and graphs. It's like me, with a 3-year-old. It's like, hey, look, it's the pretty pictures. Treat your executives like that. Not in a despairing way. It's like they just want to feed that information quickly and move on. Make it attractive to them. Make sure it's something they can digest and understand, and then move on. But it should be something that is geared towards them so that they have any questions they can ask, but it's understandable that this was what occurred. Should be simple, because sometimes they may have to hand it off to a regulator, maybe outside counsel, a business partner, a company that's acquiring them, or maybe the next incident response team that comes out. You want to have something that somebody can just read and understand, because this report should then be reviewed and finalized, and there's a sign off. Sticking with this as soon as possible, get this done within 1 to 2 weeks. Do not play the blame game, meaning people are already on edge after all this. Don't say like, Joe, the IT guy, this was all his fault. Nobody cares. It's really not that important. It doesn't help the learning process. Again, managers love pictures in that part too, where you really want to say, focus on what the meat of this is, and don't waste the opportunity of a crisis. I'm screwing up this saying now, but don't waste a good crisis, because this gathers more metrics than you can possibly imagine that can allow you to increase budgets for areas in cybersecurity. I've seen more people open up their checkbooks at the tail end during their lessons learned. They look at the report. Part of the recommendations might be, we need end user training. We need to develop a risk management program or measure it against, let's say, NIST CSF. Maybe we need to make that investment in that endpoint tool or vulnerability management solution. Checkbooks come out right now. It sucks that we have to say that this is the time, but this is the time. And then this is when if you accelerate and gather it more, and you say, look, it took us 3 days to recover this. If we made a little bit more of an investment, we can cut it down to 1.5 days on the next one. Had we had these things in place, we could have done this. Again, not blaming anybody, just saying, here's some ways we can make some investments to increase IR budgets, so we can basically cut down our mean time to respond, recover, detect, alert, whatever that metric is that's going to be most important, or all of them. Build that in, and you'll start getting that budget together, because you really want to use this opportunity to grow your IR projects. Because again, it's going to happen again, and you really have to follow the cycle. You have to apply what you've learned for better preparation. So the next time you're doing those tabletops, talk about that event. What could have gone better? How you would do it differently? Do you need better staffing, technology, policies, procedures? You build all this in. Learn something from this. It's generally a very painful, expensive process, and if you're not learning from it, you're kind of wasting that opportunity, which is sad. I've seen some organizations get hit with the same malware and ransomware within the same day, and one organization really take it off to launch their program and get past things that were really struggling, and one that ignored everything, played the blame game, fought with us, fought with the attorneys, thought they were smarter than everybody, had systems standing, and they just muddled through the process to the point where they didn't really recover properly, and it took far longer, and I don't think their program ever improved. Whereas the one that happened literally parallel grew and became a better organization out of it. So it's a learning game. So your dues, you want to have a plan. Don't wing it. Know who to call and when to call. Again, I cannot stress enough. Check out what Debbie did. That was thumbs up. It's amazing, and not knowing when, because the don't is failing to get help or report, staying calm, running around with your hair on fire. The whole psychology of it, we can spend 3 hours on it, but if you are in a heightened state of reaction, and again, you're firing and you're in fight or flight mode, you're not going to operate clearly, and you're going to make mistakes, and likely you're not going to document things. And that's good. Document everything. You're going to have incomplete notes if you're just all juiced up. Making sure you're doing the forensics properly, that you're not neglecting to preserve things properly, whether that be logs, memory artifacts, disk artifacts, whatever it is, that you're doing things and you've practiced that in advance, so you know how to gather that information, and it's not the first time you're doing it. It's not during the incident. Complete your steps and don't jump around. Don't think you're going to recover a system that was, a highly critical system that was, very likely compromised with something bad, and not get all the systems around it that is laterally connected to with an SMB V1 vulnerability. So make sure you're really going through that process as best as you can. And if you have to revert back a couple steps, great, but follow the process down and learn. I mean, that's the insanity definition is, continuing to do the same things over and over again and hoping for the same outcomes when it's clearly wrong. You don't want to do that. You really want to go through this, learn from it, and build a better program. It's not to feel bad about. I work with hundreds of organizations a year that go through incidents. It happens. Get over it. Learn from it. So now you know how to do IR. With that, I'll open up to any questions. I was trying to stay on time, and I think we're probably slightly a little bit over. But since nobody's driving anywhere or going anywhere, we can talk.
Well, thank you, Doug. I don't know about anybody else, but I think my brain is full. Do have just a couple little questions here. Sure. One of them was, where might we be able to get a hold of your slides?
Well, I would first say subscribe to the YouTube channel for ISSA Denver. They will all be there because I believe we did record and post it there. Other than that, I will make them available, and we can put a link up for that as well.
Sounds good. Let's see here. Looking at some of these questions here. If I'm a smaller company, like say there's 2 people in my security organization, how do I go about doing or even setting up an IR department?
Yeah. For most smaller organizations, I would say, first it starts with definitely some planning. A full department, might be shared responsibilities. And again, when it goes back to when we talk about having a team effort, is that IR department should really also involve leadership in the sense, whether there's, let's say, somebody in a director of IT or CIO type of role, somebody that's got some gravitas that can talk to other people with inside the organization about making business risk decisions. And from that, develop a set of policies and procedures. They do not have to be crazy. There's a bunch of free resources. SANS has stuff out there. I think MITRE has stuff now. There's a whole bunch of just resources out there, and we'll try to get through some notes on that and post them. But there's enough resources out there where you can get a template of a plan, at least of a skeleton that says here's what you do and fill in the blanks. From there, leverage your help desk ticketing system. I can't stress that enough. Most organizations go out there and like, oh, we got to buy some type of system. It's like, yeah, you can buy SIM, you can buy all these other things. Key point. And if you have a good help desk ticketing system, and I've used Zendesk for help desk ticketing systems that also have a whole bunch of workflows for IR and alerting. Feed everything into something so it's just documented. Again, storage is relatively cheap these days, and if you can gather as much of those alerts and events, that's the big thing. Because often, again, if you're a smaller company, is as you build this and that have to gather stuff, get it centralized, build it somewhere in one spot, but also reach out to, again, like I said, with folks in your cyber insurance group. If you have a policy with that, just get it. They're relatively inexpensive these days. They might have a lot of resources that can help augment that. But the first thing they're going to ask is, where are the logs? Where's this? Where's that? So if you're feeding those events and that information into something, that I would say becomes a critical thing. I mean, that's really where you want to start and then build out from there. It's like, okay, I have a place to gather things. Then what am I going to gather? Is it going to be firewall stuff I'm going to pump into there? Are there alerts that I can do on that? Are there Office 365 stuff that I can build in? That's got a ton of stuff built in now. So really kind of like figuring out, okay, where am I going to store stuff? And then figuring out where are your critical systems and pumping it into something where it's at least somewhat centralized.
All right. And you just sort of touched on the last question here, and that was, how does cybersecurity insurance and incident response tie together? Or do they?
They sure do. Over the past couple of years, cyber insurance has grown dramatically. It's an industry that's in the billions of dollars. And the reason is that it's again, I've joked about this enough, but cybersecurity is nothing more than risk management. And again, if we call it the RSA Risk Management Conference or Black Hat Risk Management, know where you would go. That's what we do. Let's just get over that fact. It's a cool buzzword. I have cybersecurity written on my mic now. I monopolize as much as anybody else, but the reality is risk management. So part of risk management is risk transference. You're transferring some of the risk to an insurance company that's going to pay it. So it should be part of a good risk management program, is for what you can't go through the other risk treatment areas. But if you can transfer some of that cyber risk to insurance company, it's great because what will happen is, again, they have these panel set of vendors that's going to be what we call as a first party losses. So it's going to be things that you would normally have to pay out of pocket if you were quote unquote self-insured, meaning you get popped and you have to go through the phone book and find Doug Brush's IR firm. It's like, you're going to have to pay rates. You're going to have to negotiate contracts. By the time you get all that stuff done, it could be a week. Whereas if you contact your broker, it says, we have panel providers, we're paying this much of it, we have pre-negotiated rates, and they're ready to start in 2 hours. It cuts down your mean time to respond dramatically. And it's really important because it's a well-oiled machine, unfortunately, because these things happen. I think just because you don't hear about it, doesn't mean this is not happening. We probably do 5, 10 a day. I mean, it's insane the amount of small organizations that are being impacted by cyber events from criminal groups and external actors that they're enacting on their cyber insurance policy, but that provides them, again, the forensics, the data breach coaches, notification vendors, sometimes press if they have to do a PR mitigation. So it's a huge part of that risk transference because a lot of organizations I've worked with would have gone out of business had they not had that policy to cover all that. Because the reality is not every organization is ready for the types of threats that we're seeing. Even the best ones have had to invest a lot of money. And if you can, I'm not saying don't do it, do what you can, but where you can't, mitigate and risk transfer where you can.
All right. Well, that's the end of the questions I have. Once again, thank you very much, Doug. If anybody does have questions, like I said, he's on Colorado Equals Slack, and you can always reach him through any of those channels there as well.
Yep, I'm fairly easy to find through the cybersecurity interviews, LinkedIn, and I'm on the Colorado Equals Security Slack. I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions there.
All right. Well, I guess with that, we'll bid you all goodbye and see you next Thursday.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.